Good evening, Little Masters, and welcome to episode 346 of the Prancing Pony Podcast, where we're fairly certain that all the hosts of the PPP would take their royal names in Quenya, not Adonaic.
Sean Tar-Miniature.
I like it. Well,
Okay.
works for me.
Folks, pull up a bench in the common room and join us. I am Don Tar Marshall, the obscure Lord of the Rings facts guy, and I am here with the man of the West who definitely wouldn't name himself the Lord of the West, Alan Sisto.
Heavens no, ill-omened indeed. Now, folks, join us as we fly through about 3,400 years of Númenórean history in our return to the appendices for the second half of the excitingly named Appendix A I Númenor.
Alan, it's a great sales pitch, but
I
it does
know.
need some workshopping.
It does.
We got it. Even Rings of Power has like a something a little bit better, but you know what? I digress.
Yeah.
Because it's certainly no Ride of the Rohirrim, but I guess it'll do.
It will. It's descriptive. It is what it says on the tin, really. Yeah.
Yes, the little I gives us so much context
Doesn't
as
it?
to what's going
Yeah.
to be happening.
There's something else after this, apparently. Yeah.
You know, there's a lot after this, all the way up to the Seventh Age. Folks, no matter how you got here, you are all welcome here in the common room. Here at the Prancing Pony Podcast, we are reading and talking our way through Middle-earth with plenty of speculation and bad jokes along the way.
Sometimes more than others. We do love our deep dives into the lore, discussing our favorite themes, and a whole lot more.
But we do try to keep it light and fun, just like a couple of friends chatting at a pub. We are very glad you've joined us.
Indeed, and I'm sure you'll be glad you joined as well. But before we get to tonight's chapter discussion, it's time to welcome a couple of guests to the common room.
You're about to hear a chat that Alan and another one of his PPP hosts, Dr. Sara Brown, had with Adam Pearce, who recently translated The Hobbit into Welsh.
Now, for those of you who heard or saw this interview on the TTT back in early August, this is the director's cut version, significantly longer with some extra questions, and we hope you enjoy the extra discussion on this incredible work. Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome to today's Tolkien Times. I'm the Man of the West, also from the Prancing Pony Podcast, and thank you for joining me for folks' favorite Fandom Fridays. Now, on these Fridays, I get the chance to visit with somebody from the wider world of the Tolkien fandom. Writers, musicians, artists, craftsmen, scholars, content creators, and more. Now, before I get to today's guest, though, I also want to welcome Dr. Sara Brown back to the TTT.
Hi.
She's co-hosted a dozen episodes of the PPP with me, some of my favorites, as a matter of fact.
Oh, you have to say that, though.
Well, but they are, really. I mean, the Steward of the King, that was just a highlight of last season for sure. And folks, Sara's one of my co-hosts on the Rings of Power wrap-up, which is going to be starting up its season 2 right along with the Amazon show next month. And I say next month, but I think this actually comes out in August, so later this month. Now, why do I have a co-host for a Fandom Friday, something I haven't done this entire time? Well, besides the fact that Sara's a joy to work with, she's also
Always.
Welsh. Always. And always humble, too. And so
Right.
that might give you a clue as to our guest today. Now, speaking of our guests, I'm pleased to introduce you to the editor of Melyn Bapur, a Welsh publishing house who will soon be releasing Hobbit, a Welsh translation of The Hobbit. Folks, please join me in welcoming Adam Pearce to today's Tolkien Times.
Thank you very much. If by soon you meant like 2 weeks ago, then yeah, very, very soon. It's
Well, we are really glad to have you.
Yeah, welcome, Adam, and thanks so much for giving up your time for us today. This is it, folks. This is what we're getting from
That's
Adam.
right.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely
absolutely
fantastic.
Put it on your shelves, folks.
Definitely. Now, I suppose the answer to my first question might be because it was about time, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What was it that motivated you to tackle a Welsh translation of The Hobbit? And given that The Hobbit has already been translated into more than 60 languages, why has it taken so long to get it into Welsh?
really, really interesting question. Really, with the second one particularly. The first one's kind of boring. The first part of the answer. Like everyone else in the whole world, I am a massive Tolkien fan. I must have read Hobbit for the first time when I was probably about 7 or 8. I read The Lord of the Rings at 10, which I think is probably a little bit unusual. Massive Tolkien fan, and obviously also Welsh. Grew up as a Welsh speaker with my speaking Welsh at home. Speaking Welsh in school. So kind of surrounded by Welsh really. So it's kind of a logical thing for me to do. As soon as I kind of really registered that it hadn't been done, I thought, oh, someone should really do that. And then I started writing a novel and realized it was awful. and then realized I'd been putting aside time to do this thing, and I should really just do something that I would actually finish. And it was also during the pandemic, which kind of meant that I had quite a bit of time sort of kicking around at home. So I just decided it was time to pull the finger out. Really, the other thing I was doing is I toyed with the idea a little bit, and then I started reading the Lord of the Rings in German as a sort of learning exercise, and I sort of suddenly realised, hang on a minute, this is the thing I have to do. This has got to happen. 4 years ago now, I started. Why is it taking so long for this to happen? Really interesting. Really, well, I think it's interesting. To answer that question, you've got to kind of delve a little bit into the state of Welsh language culture and things like that. But basically, we're really self-sufficient. We don't publish. Welsh language publishing is actually really healthy for a small language with we publish more books in Welsh than lots of languages that are much bigger, much more widely spoken. So the focus is always on original stuff. Everything is sort of new novels, new stuff, original stuff in Welsh. Translations for adults are vanishingly rare. Sort of it's extremely unusual to have any kind of book translated for adults in Welsh, and I guess it's because we can speak English. So most of us, pretty much all of us, so and via English, then we have that kind of access to all of world literature virtually, via English. So I guess people think that there isn't a demand for it, or at least that there isn't a need to translate stuff into Welsh. I mean, I completely disagree, and it's kind of been borne out by the success of the book, really. But I think that's why it hasn't happened before, was just because it's just rare for translation to happen anyway.
Well, I, for one, was delighted to see it. Absolutely fantastic.
Yeah. Well, you sort of hit on this in your answer to that question. You talked about Welsh not being a language that's widely spoken. Doing a little bit of research, I saw that it appears that there's maybe about 1 million Welsh speakers. So it's not a hugely spoken language, but it was a very important language to Tolkien himself. Not only did he find in it an abiding linguistic aesthetic satisfaction, that's from letter 163, but as many of us know, one of Tolkien's invented languages, Silmariën, is largely influenced by Welsh. Now, with the large presence of Silmariën in The Lord of the Rings, are you considering tackling a Welsh translation of that much larger work? And if so, give us an idea of what that might look like if you were to do so.
Oh, well, I mean, it's 6 times as big as the Hobbit, and the Hobbit took me 4 years. So,
okay.
Have you got 24 years?
Sure,
no problem.
Sure, I don't mind.
I mean, by then it'll be in the public domain. So, it would be fantastic to have it in Welsh, wouldn't it? What would it look like? It would be a very big book. In Welsh, about some rings of power, I suppose. The Elvish link. People often it's probably not just me, but people, if you're a Welsh speaker, you often get asked kind of, can you read Elvish then? It's like, no. Of course we can't.
Inspired by is not the same as, right?
Right.
Yeah. The spelling sometimes looks kind of similar, but you can recognize like a little word every now and again, maybe if you're looking really closely, but it's no more than like, sort of, can an English person read Icelandic? Just because they're both Germanic languages, not really. It's and there's lots.
You might catch a word or two here or there, like you said, and that's about
exactly.
As good as you can
And
get.
there's a lot of Finnish in Elvish as well, as I understand. So which is completely nothing like Welsh at all. So it's not that much of a help.
I guess I'm thinking with The Hobbit, you don't have to do a lot of representation of other languages in the text. Whereas in The Lord of the Rings, there's going to be Sindarin in the text. There'll be Quenya in the text. There'll be Rohirric in the text. And one of the fun things in The Lord of the Rings that's interesting to observe as you study it as a text is how Tolkien represents all these different languages. And I guess I was trying to figure out how would you tackle that in Welsh?
Yeah. Well, there is a bit of that in The Hobbit, maybe more than you might think. So, for example, the dwarves generally, obviously, they're so what I did in the translation is as per Tolkien's instructions, really, the dwarves' names are totally unchanged because they're meant to be in sort of dwarvish. So they're not meant to look familiar. I didn't change the orthography of the dwarves' names into sort of Welsh. Because that would have, they're meant to. You're meant to look at them and think, oh, this is a strange name, an unfamiliar name. So you're not meant to, So encountering a K, for example, the letter K doesn't occur in Welsh. We wouldn't use the letter K, but obviously you've got Kili, one of the dwarves. So and his name is unchanged in the book because Tolkien says don't mess with the names. Right. So I didn't mess with the names. But then, as people on the social media have been telling me, you changed the spelling of Gandalf, you changed the spelling of Smaug, you did all this stuff. Because I'm following the guidelines set down by Tolkien, so where the names are understood to be in the language, in the common tongue, the language of the Hobbit, which is represented in the books by English, and therefore in my book by Welsh, therefore those names I have sort of Welshified, if you like. So so Bilbo Bilbo works fine in Welsh orthography; it's not changed, but his surname is Bilbo Baglan.
Okay.
Because Baggins, you can't sound more English than Baggins, and there's no way that surname was gonna survive the translation. But Baglan is actually a village. It's a town a short distance away from where I live. So, but by pure coincidence. But maybe I was thinking of it when I came up with that. But
maybe I like that.
Actually, just to follow on from that, one of the things about modern 21st century Welsh is that it's full of anglicized neologisms, right? It's taken on English words and Welshified them, as you were talking about there. Did you come across any kind of issues with that, with translating The Hobbit?
Yeah, probably not really. I mean, I didn't try and it's a translation into modern Welsh as the language is today. There's no attempt to create some kind of pure fantasy, sort of uninflected from English influences or anything like that. There's no, it's Welsh as spoken. There were plenty of words in there that have their origins in English. It doesn't matter. That's not an issue. It's just Welsh. It's just Welsh as it is spoken. Really, I've tried to. The translation uses what you might call standard Welsh. It's not a particular kind of dialect. It's not formal, but it's just kind of literary, ordinary literary Welsh, really, which is really reflects quite well the way Tolkien wrote The Hobbit. It's in Queen's English, if you like. It's in standard English. It's not in, with some very notable exceptions, it's not in kind of any particular dialect of English. So therefore, that it would be strange to do anything with anything else with the text, frankly, than what I did, which is put it in kind of standard Welsh. And the obvious exception, of course, is the Trolls. The scene of the Trolls, they talk in kind of Cockney accents in the English, which my interpretation is always that Tolkien was kind of looking down on the kind of urban sort of working class accents, which was kind of felt a little bit mean. But I did it anyway in the Welsh version because you couldn't have them talking, the Trolls talking in kind of sort of standard literary Welsh. It would have been strange. So they talk in Cofi dialect of Carnarvon in Northwest Wales, where I spent a brief time living when I was younger, and I hope people take that as kind of the affectionate sort of representation that was intended, not as some kind of insult. Not that I don't think that they are Trolls. I think they're the best people in the world.
I'm sure they'll be pleased to hear that.
One of the things you mentioned a couple of minutes ago is about how at some point the Lord of the Rings will get into like public ownership, that it will no longer be as controlled as it has been by the Tolkien estate. But of course, you have been working with a text that is very much still held by the Tolkien estate. And to publish an official translation, you've had to work closely with them to get permissions, right? Can you tell us a little bit about what it was like to work with the estate? I mean, were they really happy to see The Hobbit translated into a language so important to Tolkien? And did they have any very specific requirements that you had to meet?
Not really, to be fair. I don't really know how to compare them to kind of other literary agents or literary estates. It was mainly sort of communicated with them through their agent, really. They had stipulations about things like the font and the arrangement of the text and things like that. But when it came to the actual translation, they didn't, that was, it was kind of, I was largely basically trusted to handle that however I saw fit, which was nice. It's nice to feel, to be sort of recognised as the person who is making those creative decisions. So it was good. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. They didn't have somebody on standby to, I don't know, check your Welsh or anything like that.
Well, if they did, then they never told me, and if they did, they never raised any issues with anything. So if they did, then that's all I could say on that. But
that's very cool.
So one of the tricky things about translations, and you already touched on this a little bit, is getting those dialects right. Now, you mentioned the trolls specifically, but Bilbo speaks differently from the dwarves. He has a very different phrasing, and certainly they both speak differently from Gandalf. And then there's the goblins who really barely speak at all. And even Beorn has a very different way of presenting. How did you handle those? They're not really dialects like the trolls, where it's an obvious, like you talked about the Cockney accent and how you replace that with a Northwest Welsh pronunciation or dialect. How did you deal with these other characters and the way they speak? Or were they so similar that you just put them into the standard Welsh, as you talked about earlier?
It's an interesting question. I guess I probably didn't think about it all that much, but they definitely talk in a different way in the translation, just as they do in the original. If I'm translating a book, then I will try and reflect if there's a difference in the way that the two characters talk. I'll try and reflect that in some way. There's definitely, as you say, there's different kind of registers that the kind of Gandalf uses. I mean, my background is actually Victorian literature in Welsh, which is actually a really good, useful background to have for this kind of project, because you've got like kind of chapel Welsh, you've got sort of the very affected way that some people wrote in Welsh in the 19th century, and you can kind of then compare that with more modern ways of talking. So there's a range of things without going into kind of regional dialects that you can reflect the different ways that talk. It's definitely there. I think it helps to have that kind of maybe a bit of a kind of probably a broader knowledge of sort of Welsh literature than the average person. It definitely helps. If you're going to then take on the project like that, because just knowing the kind of styles that you can use, is useful.
Yeah.
So one of the things I found really interesting about your translation, because I think this is unique among translations that we've looked at, is that you've replaced the Anglo-Saxon runes on the map with Welsh runes, the 18th century Coel Brennibert. Tell us about that decision and why it helps make the book more Welsh.
Well, I've actually got to credit the suggestion to somebody else. I was having a conversation with Mr. Michael Everson, who is maybe familiar to some listeners as the publisher of various versions of the Hobbit, particularly in various other languages, and in which he casually mentioned kind of the opportunity to kind of use different sort of alternatives in translations to the runes. And when he sort of did that, I kind of something twigged in my mind, and I thought, hang on a minute, I don't want to use Anglo-Saxon runes in a book about Welsh. That would be the biggest, sort of most inappropriate. The use of so it wasn't his suggestion that I used Coel Brennibert. The idea of using kind of the Anglo-Saxons in particular were at war with the Welsh for a very, very long time. They still are. The relationship between England and Wales is of course fraught with all sorts of social and political sort of baggage. So Anglo-Saxon runes is kind of would never have sat right in Welsh anyway. The amount of work it took to actually put it into Coel Brennibert was probably actually less work than recreating the Anglo-Saxon runes would have been, because I would have had to kind of rearrange, translate the actual content of the writing into Welsh anyway. So actually, when you're doing that, it's actually fairly simple to just change the shape of the runes. Coel Brenn looks actually nothing like sort of Anglo-Saxon runes. It looks very rune-like. It's very sort of angular, very, very much. It looks like the kind of thing that a dwarf would carve into a rock, so it looks kind of really appropriate, I think. But it is the individual letters. I don't think any of them are actually the same as an equivalent letter in Anglo-Saxon runes at all. So they are totally different. It's an interesting and a bit of a weird sort of historical oddity that the alphabet. It's basically a forgery. It's not authentic. It's not a real runic alphabet at all, in the sense that it was never written by kind of ancient Welsh bards as people claimed it was. It's believed. I mean, the evidence is a bit kind of dubious about exactly where it came from, but it's believed to have been the brainchild of the notorious forger Iolo Morgannwg, who invented a lot of what are now sort of annual traditions as part of the Welsh Eisteddfod. Particularly the National Eisteddfod, a lot of things which he kind of claimed were based on sort of ancient druidic ceremonies, but probably he mostly just made up. Coelbren is exactly like that. It was actually really fashionable for a period in the sort of 19th century. People would kind of carve their own gravestones with it, thinking that they were resurrecting this ancient written language, but there's no evidence of it kind of appearing before he sort of suddenly very suspiciously discovers it. It's almost certainly his invention, a pure invention of Iolo Morgannwg. So in that sense, it's a fantasy alphabet, which makes it entirely appropriate. I would argue for a fantasy novel. And like I said, if you look at if anyone just takes a look at the runes, they still look like runes. They still look very much like something a dwarf would carve. They don't look kind of out of place, really. And Anglo-Saxon runes have kind of always been a really weird thing to have in The Hobbit anyway, because they're a real world script. But they're not like, if Tolkien had invented a script and used that in The Hobbit, then I wouldn't have touched it. I wouldn't have changed it at all, because it would have been sort of a sort of authentic, Tolkienism that I would have felt the need to preserve. So, but he didn't. It's got nothing to do with Middle Earth. And it's no more kind of appropriate really to use that than any other writing system, really, except that they say that they're runes, so you assume therefore that they're carving them on things. Right. Coelbren ticks all of those boxes whilst being something that's Welsh and being something that's interesting and being something that's got me at least 5 minutes on a podcast. So it's we wanted to. I was aware when to decide to do that. I was aware that there were going to be people who would be interested in this book who wouldn't be able to read the book. So I wanted to put something in for them as well that would kind of interesting for the people who collect. And I know that they exist. For the people who collect every different version of the Tolkien book that exists, that they have something that they can say, well, this is a unique thing about this one that makes it different, rather than it simply being a translation and really a translation.
I like that, and I think you hit on it earlier that there's something very appropriate about it being an invented set of runes. A fantasy alphabet, as you put it. And I'm thinking, Tolkien invented languages constantly, and I mean, they're fully developed, and but they were frauds in a way. I mean, there aren't ancient elves who spoke Sindarin or Quenya, and just like there weren't ancient peoples in Wales who carved those particular runes that this fraudster developed. But it's a really interesting and I think appropriate fit, and certainly given the history between Anglo-Saxon language and the Welsh language, I think you're right. It made a lot of sense. I like it. So.
Talking about the words being appropriate, it occurred to me, and I meant to ask you this, occasionally you come across a word that Tolkien seems to have made up, but he really hasn't, that actually has a huge connection to Welsh, like the carrock, for example, which is so close to the Welsh word for rock. Did you come across any other words that struck you like that?
When you say that, it immediately it's almost a Welsh word. It's almost a Welsh word, and I called it a carrog, which is not the word for rock, because I can't just call it a rock. But I had to make it something that there was nearly that, without changing it too much. So I can't think of anything else. I can't think of anything else, obviously, but there's definitely things like that in there, isn't there? And you've got to be kind of careful when you get to them, and make sure that you're reflecting something of the sort of slightly different sort of fantasy element of it, rather than making it really kind of bland and ordinary. Somebody once, I remember somebody asked me once, he said, if you speak Welsh, do you find it really easy to come up with D&D names for your characters? And I said, well, firstly, I've never played D&D, but if I did, like, I wouldn't call my D&D characters Welsh names any more than you'd call them Steve and John. To me, they're just ordinary names. I went to school with 5 people called Angharad. There's nowhere. There's that kind of, those kind of names are totally ordinary to me. So if they're meant to be different, kind of in the translation, you can't just reuse them. You can't just reuse
No.
That would be like having Sophie the elf and Gerald the dwarf.
That wouldn't be exactly. So when you come across like a carrot, you can't just call it a carreg.
Yeah.
No.
Because that is just a rock.
Yeah.
And then they asked the question. Someone asked, Bilbo asked, well, why is it called a carrog? So Gandalf explained, well, it's called a carrog because that's what he calls it, and that's his name for such things. So. And this is the one that's near where he lives. So those kind of details. You'll just trip yourself up if you try and do anything other than make it a bit make it different.
That word nerdery, which I think is really fascinating, leads me to something else very similar. In this case, the Welsh word for rock is very similar to the carrag. What about when words are very similar to an Anglo-Saxon or Old English word? I'm thinking of Arkenstone, which comes from Eorknenstan, which I think means like sacred stone or holy stone or something like that. What about a word like that? What do you do with Arkenstone?
Yeah, that's a good. You were asking me, and then now you brought it up. Yeah, that's got an interesting story to it as well. So I've called it an archvine. So the prefix arch is like arch, as in kind of arch. Emperor,
like arch enemy or high.
Okay. And just like that, it kind of means like the great or the mighty. So like it's the mighty stone that which kind of totally fits.
That fits,
fits the context of what it is. So calling it an archvine simultaneously sounds extremely Welsh, and also describes it quite well, and also it totally echoes the Arkenstone by total coincidence. It's probably not total coincidence. It's probably where there's probably some kind of etymological common roots to arcane in English and arch in Welsh, probably. An arch in English, definitely. There's probably some common root there. So so that kind of thing is. But there's other things where you have to do like the sort of the riddles, for example.
Oh yeah.
The chapter with the riddles was the greatest joy and the greatest challenge of the translation. Not least because there is no word in Welsh for riddle. which kind of so you have to kind of so with the clusters you've got this kind of puzzle. It doesn't quite convey the same thing, but
no.
Some of the riddles even work better in Welsh, I think. So, for example, one of the riddles is something like an eye in the sky looks at an eye on the ground. Now, in Welsh, if something is in full sunlight, you say it's in llygad y haul, which means in the eye of the sun. And if something is, and the Welsh word for daisy, which I think is actually where the daisy comes from, is from day's eye, but actually the Welsh word for daisy is llygad y dydd, which means the day's eye. So when he talks about an eye in the sky and an eye in the sky, it's like it's almost really it works better in Welsh, and it's almost too obvious. It's like that's the easiest riddle ever because you're just virtually giving it to someone to play.
Right,
so that kind of So but the runes were the riddles were kind of, some of them were pretty tricky to get to kind of work. In some cases I thought like, something's got to go here. Either I change the riddle completely, or at least change the kind of the rhyme scheme, or one of these has to go. So usually I would throw out the rhyme because that felt like the least important. So I would rhyme it differently. Whatever worked really. So I've come up with I don't think any of them are really kind of traditional riddles that are kind of in the way that the Tolkien's are. I don't think any of them were really kind of I didn't find any kind of translations of those exact riddles that had been used in the past, but they all kind of work, I think, at least I hope, that they all kind of work in their new sort of form, and that people, I really hope people will really enjoy that chapter because I got a lot of joy out of writing it. So,
well, it's the central chapter to the entire story, so I can only imagine it was the one that you poured so much time into. It's so key, especially if a Lord of the Rings in Welsh ever comes. That connection is all back to chapter 5. I mean, that is the tie, and that's why it's such an important chapter. But yeah,
the songs generally, and sometimes the most silly and sort of the lightest songs are actually sometimes the hardest. I think the one that I rewrote most times was actually one of the ones that the elves sing in the Hobbit. As you'll know, that there are some kind of really throwaway kind of fa la 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 la
lolly.
Yeah. And I think that's the one that I actually had to rewrite sort of the most times. Whereas, the more serious ones are actually a lot easier to do because you kind of think, well, just get the rhythm, get the rhythm right, get the rhyme right, and then fit the meaning in when you can. That was the kind of approach that I took. Make it sound like the kind of thing that Thorin would say. Don't. That covers the same sort of meaning ground in terms of meaning and that was my approach with the song. With some of them, they took a lot of rewrites and
Alan, I think you've got some major material for some word nerdery for Prancing Pony.
I'm so excited now, and I'm going to have to get you back on, Sara, because you can help me with the language when we talk through it. Now I want to know how goblins sing in Welsh about roasting body parts when they're all in the trees.
Sure, we could come up with something.
And the popping eyeballs and all the gross stuff that they're singing about. But
it's such a dark novel, isn't it? It's like it was a while since I'd read it when I came back translating it. When I came across that bit, I don't remember them singing about roasting fat and so on. But it's there. So I was thinking I would read it to my 5-year-old, but maybe I'll wait a little bit, or maybe skip that song.
I started to read it to my son when he was 5, I think, or maybe 6, and I got to that. I thought, I think I'll just skip right past this. Then they sang a song about killing the dwarves, and here we go with the eagles.
Yeah, Tolkien didn't believe in protecting children from the dark side of life.
No, he did not. Especially you read on fairy stories, he makes that quite clear. Well, Adam, we've kind of hinted at this before a little bit, when we've talked about the success of the book so far, but what has the reception been like? And I don't just mean sales numbers, though, of course, we'd love to hear how successful it's been, but how has the translation itself been received among Welsh speakers who are, of course, very familiar with the text of The Hobbit in English?
Yeah, a lot of them are. And, if you think that would mean that they wouldn't be interested, then not at all. People are actually really keen to, and that was one of the reasons why I translated it, because there are different reasons why you would read a book in Welsh. Okay, you might read it because you want to enjoy just for the sheer pleasure of reading the book, but you might read it because you want to learn some more Welsh, or you want to improve the Welsh that you've got, or whatever. There's loads of different reasons why you might want to read it, and just the fact that you can read it in English is actually almost irrelevant. I believe it really doesn't. That's not the reason that someone chooses to read a book in Welsh. It's just because they can't read it in any other language. That's like the least important reason why you would read a book in Welsh. The reception, I mean, we're getting some reviews. We haven't had them yet, but we will. It'll sink or swim on the back of those. There'll be one in, as I understand, there'll be one, at least one of those in English in a major sort of online publication. Another one in one of the Welsh language magazines. So that's going to be really good. To get that kind of critical response. In terms of kind of anecdotal people telling me stuff, it's been really, really positive. People have said how pleased they were with it. There was one person telling me, the one person commented he said everything about it's perfect. It's as if Tolkien had written it in Welsh, which I thought, wow, that's what I was going for. So at least there is at least one guy somewhere who thinks it's that good. So this is not my full-time job. I'd love it if it were, but it's something that I've done as a kind of labor of love. And if it brings that kind of joy to people, then I'm extremely proud of it. And as well, it's getting people to read that wouldn't. I've seen other people saying, this is the first book I've tried to read in Welsh. Which is really fantastic. That's exactly what I wanted to do. In terms of how well it sold extremely well by the standards of a Welsh book. If you think that maybe 600,000 people sort of speak Welsh, well, we're already in 4 figures. So that's one for every 600 at least one for every 600 people who could read it theoretically, and that's pretty good. If that was an English book, it would be, 200 million or something like that, the equivalent sort of market share, so
that would be good.
I don't know if that's the metric by which you should measure the success of it, but
why not?
It's sold really well. We've sold in all over the world as well. In Australia, in the US, lots in the US and Australia. There's big expat communities out there from Wales, and I imagine a lot of collectors as well, and all over Europe as well. So it's done very well. I'm really, really pleased with the way it's gone.
That's great.
That's absolutely fantastic. Adam, diolch yn fawr. Thank you again for joining us today. It was a real pleasure to talk with you, and we both wish you and Hobbit the greatest of success.
Diolch yn fawr iawn.
That was a lot of fun, and I sure hope he actually manages to translate The Lord of the Rings, but we'll have to see. In the meantime, Dawn, would you start out? I gave you the roll call of the Kings and Queens of Númenor because I believe in you, sir.
Thank you. Now, for those of you that maybe missed last episode, I struggled a lot with these names. So I'm going to do my best, and we'll see what happens.
All right.
These are the names of the kings and queens of Númenor. Elros, Tar-Miniatur, Vardamir, Tar-Amandil, Tar-Elendil, Tar-Meneldor, Tar-Aldarion, Tar-Ancalime, the first ruling queen, Tar-Anarion, Talsurion, Tar-Telperion, the second queen, Tar-Menastir, Tar-Kiriton, Tar-Atanamir the Great, Tar-Ancaliman, Tar-Telemaite, Tar-Vanimelda, the third queen, Tar-Alcarin, Tar-Kalmakil, and Tar-Adamin. After Ardamin, the kings took the scepter in names of the Númenórean or Adunaic tongues. Ar-Adunacor, Ar-Zimrathon, Ar-Sakalthor, Ar-Gimilzor, Ar-Inziladun. Inziladun repented of the ways of the kings and changed his name to Tar-Palantir, the far-sighted. His daughter should have been the fourth queen, Tar-Miriel, but the king's nephew usurped the scepter and became Ar-Pharazôn the Golden, the last king of the Númenóreans. In the days of Tar-Elendil, the first ships of the Númenóreans came back to Middle-earth. His elder child was a daughter, Silmariën. Her son was Valandil, the first of the lords of Anduniae in the west of the lands, renowned for their friendship with the Eldar. From him were descended Amandil, the last lord, and his son, Elendil the Tall.
Give him a hand, everybody. Mr. Don Marshall and the role of the kings and queens.
This is why I give Rings of Power so much grace, because look, if you're going through the appendix, this is not compelling narrative.
No, you're right. Yeah, let's be clear. This is exactly the most riveting prose that Tolkien's ever written.
Oh, no. And it makes up a good chunk of this portion, which
it does,
is just wild. All right. Sorry. We carry on.
We
Let's
do
go.
indeed. Like I said, it's just not all that riveting, but it is what it is, right?
Mm-hmm. But we learn a lot because of these characters' names, and it gives us context for sort of what we're trying to do in explaining all of this 3,400 years of history.
That's right. Now, our job here is to make it more interesting, to flesh out this mere list of names. So that's what we're going to do. And for that, we're going to look at Unfinished Tales, The Line of Elros, Kings of Númenor, The Nature of Middle-earth, edited by Carl F. Hostetter, and The Fall of Númenor, edited by Brian Sibley.
The first name on this list is that of Elros Tar-Miniatur. We did the word nerdery on his name back a couple of episodes ago. And of course, we've spoken about his choice as a son of Earendil to be counted among men.
That's right. Now, in Unfinished Tales, we read this. He was born 58 years before the Second Age began. He remained unwearied until he was 500 years old and then laid down his life in the year 442, having ruled for 410 years.
And in The Nature of Middle-earth, we read something very interesting about his lifespan. First, we learn that the Edain asked for two things when they were offered the reward by the Valar after the fall of Thangorodrim: long life and peace.
Sounds like my grandmother whenever I asked her what she wanted for Christmas. Seriously, she would say world peace. And I'm like, thanks a lot, Grandma. What am I going to get you? Anyway, in response to that request for long life and peace, we read, peace was readily granted, long life not so readily, and only after Manwe had consulted Eru. So it turns out that Elros, this is interesting, wasn't actually changed physically like the mortals that descended from him. We read that he and his brother were not actually differently endowed so far as the purely physical potentiality of life was concerned.
Instead, he was given what Tolkien called the chief human characteristic that distinguishes them from the elves, the seeking elsewhither, as the Eldar call it, the weariness or desire to depart from the world. Tolkien says that Elros died or resigned life when he was about 500 years old.
That is so interesting. I don't think I've known that in all my time as a Tolkien fan. I guess I just imagined that the moment he said, I want to be counted among the men, he somehow physically changed and would eventually die of old age, even Númenórean old age. But in fact, he didn't. He didn't. His body was not mortal in the way that all his descendants would have been. He just had that desire to seek elsewhere, that weariness, that world weariness. The same thing that we see, obviously, at the very end of Aragorn's life. But somebody like Aragorn, who knew that it was time to lay down his life, he still would have died. Every single one of Elros's descendants, and we'll see, because there is one of these kings who actually holds on to the scepter until he dies, which is a terrible idea. But only Elros had this. And I don't think I knew that he did. I didn't realize that his body wasn't changed. He had still the elf-like body that could have continued with that potentiality of life, as Tolkien says. Really interesting.
The inner character writer in me wants to know like what the conversation was between him and his wife, being like, are you sure you don't want to just kind of chill out here forever?
I don't know. 500 years is a nice round number, ma'am.
Hey, it's, of all of the weird, like, dates and places and locations, the fact that it's like, oh yeah, I guess like 500 years, like, why don't you have the exact one?
I mean, that's so interesting that it was 500 years, and it now makes sense that he's sort of like, all right, half a millennium, that's long enough.
I'm seen things you people wouldn't believe.
500 years is a long time, so that explains it though. Now, the next name on the list might stand out to you because it's the only name on the list without the tar prefix, or later on the R prefixes. And it's just the name Vardamir.
Yeah, this name likely means Varda jewel with the mir element.
Yeah.
And in Unfinished Tales, we read that he was called Noliman for his chief love of the ancient lore.
Noliman. I like that. That's a good name. He was definitely a nerd, right? He was one of us.
Yeah.
We read, though, in Unfinished Tales, the reason why he didn't get the tar prefix, and it really has to do with what we just talked about with Elros's long life. When his father Elros laid down his life, Vardamir was already 381 years old. Thanks, Dad.
A little bit of a Queen Elizabeth and
her
son situation.
Exactly.
My goodness.
So he ended up giving the scepter directly to his son, Tar-Atanamir, to rule.
Yeah, we get an explanation in Unfinished Tales that Vardamir is still accounted the second of kings and is deemed to have reigned for 1 year.
Precisely 1 year, right, exactly. The year in which he inherited the scepter and then handed off the scepter is still considered a year of his rule. Now, it was also his choice to hand over the scepter that began the tradition of yielding the scepter before death. Elros had laid down his life, and that's when the scepter went to Vardamir. But Vardamir, by handing it off before he died, began this tradition of yielding the scepter before death, so that, quote, the kings died of free will while yet in vigor of mind. Although, spoilers, it won't stay that way.
Yeah, it never does.
No.
Tar-Amandir is next on the name.
That's right. That's the next name on the list. The name Amandil is Quenya for lover of Aman, right? It uses that now recognizable suffix, or should be for most of you, that NDIL. We see it in Eärendil and Elendil. And it means friend of, or lover, or devoted to, right? Eärendil is, the lover of the sea, or devoted to the sea. Well, Amandil is lover of Aman. His son and the next king was Tar-Elendil.
He was known as Parmaite, which means book in hand.
Yes.
So Parma is book, as in Parma Eldalamberon, and the Maite suffix meaning handed, according to the Unfinished Tales Index.
That's right.
This is because he made books from the notes on legends and lore that his grandfather, Vardamir Nolimon, had gathered. A little bit of a Christopher Tolkien situation
Pretty
going on
much,
there.
yeah. I'm also
Yeah.
imagining, like my grandson gathering notes from, 500 or 600 outlines of episodes of the PPP and putting it all together in a book.
Yeah, I mean, I think I found my new calling, Alan. Anyway, we continue. Oh, it's okay. We already have a book. As cool as the nerdy nicknames are, Tar-Atanamir and his reign are known for two things. The first is that during his reign in the Second Age, year 600, that the Númenórean ships first made a journey back to Middle-earth.
That's right, 600 years. And that was when Veantur sailed his ship Entulesse, which means return, to the Grey Havens, where he was welcomed by Gil-galad, and a friendship between the men of Númenor and the elves of Lindon began. Now, the other thing that Tar-Atanamir is known for is actually his eldest daughter, Silmariën. The law of inheritance that Númenor used at the time, and that's that agnatic primogeniture that we talked about before, meant that she could not ascend to the throne. Even though she's the eldest child, it had to be the eldest son at that point.
Yeah, I like how you throw out agnatic, progema, whatever, like we've all just remember what it means from the last lesson of...
Agnatic primogeniture, of course.
Yeah, of course. It's like spabimi, but way more complicated.
A few more syllables, yeah, no doubt.
Yeah, a couple. So after she is married and her son Valandil is born, by the way, great name, Valandil, lover of the Valar.
I love that name, yeah.
Yeah. So then Elendil made him the first of the lords of the Adunie, whose line would survive through Elendil, his son Isildur, and eventually, several dozen generations later, Aragorn Elisar.
That's right. And I do have to give a little bit of a hat tip to Rings of Power for naming Isildur's friend Valandil, because Isildur's son is named Valandil. Clearly,
it's a very nice touch.
It is beautiful.
As soon as I saw that, I went, "Oh, I get it now." That's because before I was like, "Wait a minute, how that can't be his." I thought that was
the minute though that I saw his name, I realized he's gonna die. I mean, you name your son after your friend because your friend died, so he's doomed. All right, back to this text. We get Tar-Meneldor and Tar-Aldarion as the next kings. Now, for more on those two, you really should check out my 24-part series on Today's Tolkien Times Second Age Saturdays that ran from March to September of 23. Or you can just come back next season when Sara and I are going to spend several weeks talking through the story of Aldarion and Arendis.
The TLDR, which stands for Too Long Didn't Read, version of Meneldor is that he married the daughter of Veantur, the captain of the ships under Tar-Elendil, and that his name means servant of the heavens, and he built, wait for it, the observatory.
That's right, yeah.
So he, as well, stepped down early, resigning the scepter to his son in a policy decision related to Gil-galad's request for aid.
That's right. Now, the way too long, definitely didn't read version of Aldarion is that he was a mighty mariner, sailed to Middle-earth a lot, much to his girlfriend, betrothed wife, Arendis' dismay. He, however, was the one who changed the law of succession from agnatic primogeniture to absolute primogeniture, meaning the oldest surviving child, male or female, would inherit the scepter.
Kind of a toss-up, these whole you're king because you're born first. But it was also during his reign, around Second Age, year 1000, Sauron moved to Mordor and began building Barad-dûr.
That's right. Now, Aldarion's only child, a daughter named Ancalame, became Tar-Ancalame, the first ruling queen of Númenor. She reigned for a little over 200 years, reluctantly married, had a pretty awful marriage, bore a son, and rejected the policies of her father, ceasing aid to Gil-galad.
Yeah, not so great. So during her reign back in Middle-earth, Sauron, trying to seduce the elves, winning over the Smiths of Eregion, if this sounds familiar because you're watching Rings of Power.
That's the time frame.
Yep. Also, Númenor began establishing the sort of permanent havens.
Correct. Now, next up after her was her son Tar-Anarion. There's not much to be said about his reign. The interesting bit is that his eldest two children were daughters, but both refused the heirship, likely out of fear of their grandmother Ancalame, who would not allow them to marry. So it ended up being his son Tar-Surin that inherited the scepter.
Yeah, and much like this one, not much to be said about Tar-Soryon's reign either. But during that time, some very crafty craftsmen named Anatar, as well as the Smiths of Eregion, began forging the, wait for it,
Yes.
Rings of Power.
Yes, as opposed to the necklaces of agility.
Or the boots of swiftness. So, yes, we continue. Tar-Soryon's daughter, this is Tar-Telperion, became the second ruling queen of Númenor, but refused to marry and had no heir. So, when she resigned the scepter, it went to her nephew, Menastir, and he was the son of her brother, Tar-Soryon's son, Isilmo.
Exactly. And that's just the rule of absolute primogeniture. At that point, she has no heir, so it goes back previous generation looking to the next child born. That would be Isilmo, and then his eldest, who in this case was Tar-Menastir. Now, during Tar-Telperion's reign, though, around Second Age 1590, the three rings were completed, and then a decade or so later, around Second Age 1600, Sauron forged the One Ring. Almost 100 years later, in 1693, the war between Sauron and the elves began, and 4 years later, in 1697, Eregion is laid waste, with Celebrimbor becoming a thing.
Oh, I didn't think
see
you were
that
going to
coming.
say that, but no. Oh,
Yeah.
No, I hear you.
Too early?
It's good.
Too soon?
No. When is the... no, because that episode will be out by the time this airs, correct?
Oh, yeah. By the time this airs, I'm sure. Yeah.
That's going to be a real bummer.
I mean,
for
we're just
anyone that
assuming that's going to happen. I hope that they do, because we're actually recording this before episodes 7 and 8 have aired.
Oh, yeah, no, that's true. I just kind of assume
just
they're going to
assume.
do it because it's so, like, it's the iconic part of the... Yeah. So this is when we run into... understandably, a bit of a problem, because Tar-Telperion is said to have reigned until 1731, but we are also told that King Tar-Menastir sent a large Númenórean fleet to Middle-earth to aid the elves in Second Age 1700.
31 years before Tar-Telperion's reign is supposedly ending. As Christopher Tolkien writes in the footnotes to this section in Unfinished Tales, the date 1731 here given for the end of the rule of Tar-Telperion and the accession of Tar-Menastir is strangely at variance. I cannot in any way account for the discrepancy. So, with that discrepancy in mind, Tar-Menastir must have ascended to the throne prior to Second Age 1695, because he was the one who sent the fleet in that year that arrived in 1700 and essentially kicked Sauron's butt out of Eriador.
Yeah, and for those of you listening, there will be a test on this afterwards, so make sure you remember the dates, okay? In the Unfinished Tales, we read that he loved the Eldar, but envied them. More on that in a bit, because we're actually going to stop this incredibly compelling, detailed narrative that Tolkien gives us of the kings and queens, because the next section we read speaks of the shadow. The shadow that fell upon Númenor during Tar-Menastir's days. So we will cover the rest right after this break.
Now soon, we'll get back to watching the Fall of Númenor in super fast time lapse, but before we do, we want to remind you that there is a lot more talk going on at the Prancing Pony Podcast than just us.
Yes, the time lapse of the ocean getting larger and larger as it approaches Númenor.
And the volcano erupting, and yeah.
All happening at once. The PPP has an excellent listener community. They are always coming up with great questions and discussion across our social media spaces. You can check out our common room on Facebook, the dedicated subreddit, Twitter, and more.
Now on Facebook, just look for the Prancing Pony Podcast. You're going to follow the page to get the news and episodes, but you're going to want to join the group to get involved in some really, really fun discussions.
Or if you prefer Reddit, you can find us there at r/PrancingPonyPod. On Twitter and Instagram, we are simply at PrancingPonyPod.
That's right. Now, if you want daily Tolkien content, check out today's Tolkien Times. I mentioned it earlier about Eldarion and Arendis. Check that out on YouTube and all your favorite podcast apps. It's a short format daily show with everything from Mailbag Mondays to Silmarillion Saturdays. Be sure to check it out at youtube.com/@TolkienTimes and follow @TolkienTimes on all your social media.
Thank you so much for listening. And now back to your regularly scheduled Dark Lord.
Really, the Dark Lord? Or is that what you're referring to me now as? The Dark Lord?
You know, I wasn't, but I am now. Thank you for the idea. Appreciate that.
Man. I can't believe I just set myself up for that. All right.
Swing and a home run for me. All right, Alan, why don't you, Mr. Dark Lord, go ahead and give us our next reading.
I will indeed. The realm of Númenor endured to the end of the Second Age, and increased ever in power and splendor. And until half the age had passed, the Númenóreans grew also in wisdom and joy. The first sign of the shadow that was to fall upon them appeared in the days of Tar-Atanamir, 11th king. He it was that sent a great force to the aid of Gil-galad. He loved the Eldar, but envied them. The Númenóreans had now become great mariners, exploring all the seas eastward, and they began to yearn for the west and the forbidden waters. And the more joyful was their life, the more they began to long for the immortality of the Eldar. Moreover, after Monastir, the kings became greedy of wealth and power. At first, the Númenóreans had come to Middle-earth as teachers and friends of lesser men afflicted by Sauron. But now their havens became fortresses, holding wide coastlands in subjection. Tar-Atanamir and his successors levied heavy tribute, and the ships of the Númenóreans returned laden with spoil. It was Tar-Atanamir who first spoke openly against the ban, and declared that the life of the Eldar was his by right. Thus the shadow deepened, and the thought of death darkened the hearts of the people. Then the Númenóreans became divided. On the one hand were the kings and those who followed them, and were estranged from the Eldar and the Valar. On the other were the few who called themselves the faithful. They lived mostly in the west of the land. The kings and their followers little by little abandoned the use of the Eldarin tongues. And at last the 20th king took his royal name in Númenórean form, calling himself Tar-Atanamir, Lord of the West. This seemed ill-omened to the faithful, for hitherto they had given that title only to one of the Valar or to the elder king himself. And indeed, Tar-Atanamir began to persecute the faithful and punished those who used the elven tongues openly, and the Eldar came no more to Númenor.
Just a friendly reminder to any gods out there potentially trying to overtake, stop making things forbidden. It usually leads to rebellion. Just a quick note out there. All right, so we did skip a paragraph, but we've already talked about it. It's the explanation of the change to the laws of succession, and though they're not named, this is talking about Aldarion and his daughter Ancalime.
That's right. And then we get to this summary of the rest of the history of Númenor. I mean, hey, if Tolkien can summarize the entirety of the Silmarillion in one paragraph, he can certainly shrink Akalabeth down to 8, right? I mean, it can't be that hard after jamming the Silmarillion together like that. We start with this one-sentence recap of the kings and queens of Númenor that we just went through in the last section, becoming more powerful and, for at least half the Second Age, growing in wisdom and joy.
But then we get the mention of the king we talked about a moment ago, Tar-Atanamir, and how the first signs of the shadow came during his reign.
Right.
And it is here that we get the notion of Tar-Atanamir loving but also envying the Eldar, specifically now that they have become, successful mariners and have explored the East. They are now yearning for the West.
That's right. Now, their first trip back to Middle-earth was more than 1,000 years ago by now. So, I mean, it because these names are of kings and queens who lived for a very long time, it's almost difficult to think that, 4 or 5 kings later is this long, but it is. So this was more than 1,000 years ago. Back in Second Age 600, they made their first trip back. So, of course, it's only 7 rulers, but that's the long life of the Númenóreans for you right there.
Yeah. This is the hard part to read, especially because the happier they were, the better things are going, the more envious they are of the elves' mortality. They want this to last forever.
Yeah. And that is rough because, remember, that's what they asked for, right? They asked for longer life, and they asked for peace and wisdom, and they were given these things. And the challenge now is to have enough wisdom to recognize that you're still mortal and to accept that. But, Tar-Atanamir, he did. He was the last of the good kings. I mean, sure, the beginnings of the shadow had fallen, but he did genuinely love the elves. And let's face it, he saved their butts. I mean, really.
You're welcome.
Yeah, exactly. You're welcome. Now, can we have some of that immortality? No. It's not ours to give, man.
Not so much after Tar-Atanamir. No. The text says that after him, the kings became greedy of wealth and power.
Right.
So this was the period of their imperial expansion as they all converted havens into military bases and began to sort of rule the coastlands as overlords rather than come to help lesser men.
I, for one, welcome our Númenórean overlords. Little Simpsons reference for you. The text moves on straight away to Tar-Atanamir, and we will have plenty to say about him in a bit. But we should note that between Tar-Minastir and Tar-Atanamir was Tar-Kiryatan. And it's really Tar-Kiryatan that sets the tone for his son, Atanamir, to follow.
We read in Unfinished Tales that he was mighty, but also greedy.
Yeah.
His servants brought back great stores of metals and gems and oppressed the men of Middle-earth. Something we mentioned before about how metals last week. We mentioned how metals and gems
All metals
very
were precious metals at that time, yeah. By this point, not as much, but still, clearly he was after, wealth, yeah.
Yeah. But Alan, it does get worse because it is said that he constrained his father to yield to him, heir of his free will, he would.
Oh. In other words, Dad, it's time. Give me the scepter. No, I don't want to. Dad, it's time. Fine, here's the scepter. I'm out. Now, I would like to think that it would have made a difference, honestly, that Tar-Minastir would have, lived out his reign a little bit longer and made a difference. But the truth is, he ended up dying in Second Age 1873, only 4 years after surrendering the scepter to Kiryatan. So really would have only delayed the inevitable at this point. Still, though, because he did this, right, by forcing his father's hand, Tolkien is telling us that he caused the first coming of the shadow upon the bliss of Númenor.
Yeah, and then we get a deepening of that shadow and the sort of division among the people of Númenor caused by Kiryatan's son, Atanamir.
And if you thought Tar-Kiryatan was a bad guy, greedy and pushing his father out of the throne, oppressing the men of Middle-earth, well, Atanamir says, hold my beer. The text tells us that he spoke openly against the ban of the Valar and held the position that immortality was his by right. This guy's bold. I got to give him that.
Yeah.
And with that kind of leadership, well, now we see a split among the people of Númenor, right? We get the king's men and the faithful.
Yeah, it kind of makes sense from this point. For more on this, we will be going to the Akallabeth in the Silmarillion for some lengthy readings on the opposition to the ban of the Valar. First, we read that people were murmuring and complaining among themselves about the ban. Why do the lords of the West sit there in peace unending, while we must die, and go we know not whither, leaving our homes, and all that we have made, and the Eldar die not, even those that rebelled against the lords? And since we have mastered all seas, and no water is so wild or so wide that our ships cannot overcome it, why should we not go to Avalone and greet there our friends?
Some even I know. Oh man.
The response to this though is
I know.
Fantastic.
It really is. But still a little bit more about the murmuring and complaining. Some had gone so far as to suggest they should just go to Aman and taste, quote, the bliss of the powers, even if it was just for one day. This is what we call a very bad idea. So
anyone with kids, I don't have them, but I have nieces and nephews. Just 5 more minutes. I swear, I just only need it for 5 more minutes. 5 more minutes of TV, 5 more minutes of video games.
So when the elves, who were still visiting Númenor at this time, right, they haven't stopped visiting yet, they will eventually. When they heard these things, they went and told the Valar, and Manwë is said to have been grieved. He wasn't angry, he was grieved, he was sorrowful that the Númenóreans were feeling this way. So he sent messengers directly to Tar-Atanamir, who delivered this message in part.
I'm not upset, I'm just disappointed. Sorry to interrupt you, I couldn't help it.
Wow.
Sorry. I'm sorry.
No, you're not, and that's
Fits so perfectly.
It did, didn't it?
I'm not upset, I'm just grieved.
Yeah, I'm just grieved. I'm not.
I apologize. Carry on, Alan.
The doom of the world, one alone can change, who made it. And were you so to voyage, that escaping all deceits and snares, you came indeed to Aman, the blessed realm, little would it profit you. For it is not the land of Manwë that makes its people deathless, but the deathless that dwell therein have hallowed the land. And there you would but wither and grow weary the sooner, as moths in a light too strong and steadfast.
Now, as a former journalist, I love delivering the news, and I would love to report that Atanamir said, oh, well, if that's the case, we'll just stay here and be content with our long lives. But no, in fact, he did not. He tried to argue, asking them about Eärendil.
Now, of course, that's a non-starter. I mean, Eärendil has a fate apart, and for good reason. Also, he can never come back to mortal lands. He is in the ship, part of the ship, part of the crew. He is Venus, and he's not coming back. So really not the case you want to be making, Tar-Atanamir.
So the messengers make the point, you want the best of both worlds, but you're not Hannah Montana. You want to go to Valinor whenever you like and then come back to Númenor, but no.
And that's a reference that's far too young for me. But anyway, these messengers also make the point that immortality isn't exactly reward and mortality isn't exactly punishment. They try to explain that the serial longevity of the elves is simply the fulfillment of their being, while the same death is true of men. They escape and leave the world.
Yeah. And I do want to just pause and give a quick note because Alan, you inadvertently, and without knowing, gave me one of my favorite quotes from the entirety of the Tolkien Legendarium.
Good.
This whole explanation between the elves and the humans.
I'm so glad it fell that way.
Here we go. All right. So here's how they make it clear. Therefore, though you be the Dunedain, the fairest of men, who escaped from the shadow of old and fought valiantly against it, we say to you, beware. The will of Eru may not be gainsayed, and the Valar bid you earnestly not to withhold the trust to which you are called, lest soon it become again a bond by which you are constrained. Hope, rather, that in the end, even the least of your desires shall have fruit. The love of Arda was set in your hearts by Ilúvatar, and he does not plant to no purpose. Nonetheless, many ages of men unborn may pass ere that purpose is made known, and to you it will be revealed, and not to the Valar.
Wow, that is such a great passage.
You
may be mighty men. You have gotten this reward because you were mighty men. You fought against the shadow. But we can't change the will of the one who created the world, who created you, who created us. And that's just never gonna change. So you got to trust that. You got to trust that the love of Arda that same maker has placed in your hearts was set there for a reason, and you will eventually, as a race, know what that reason is. You, Tar-Atanamir, might not know, and that's okay. You're going to have to trust. Man, it's hard.
You could almost say that something about the humans shall prove, but the instrument of Eru Ilúvatar, maybe?
Well, everything sort of does, but yeah. Even the fall
Is this a Spabimi, maybe?
Yeah, even the fall of Númenor, as we've talked about.
Yeah.
Because the timing of the fall of Númenor, we've had this conversation. If they fell 500 years later, it's too late for Middle-earth. Sauron dominates. He's wiped out the elves. The survivors of the downfall of Númenor had to get there early enough to ally with the elves so that they could have the last alliance and defeat Sauron. Just fantastic.
Yeah. It's good stuff.
I just want to kind of hang out around this idea for a bit, though. The idea that these mightiest and best people, right, the fairest of men who escaped from the shadow, keep in mind, these are the ancestors of Aragorn. These are the descendants of Eärendil.
They're cool guys.
Yeah. I mean, the best of the best of the best. And it is interesting how, especially given how Tolkien puts such an emphasis on bloodline, that doesn't prevent these people from falling into foolishness and jealousy and lack of trust and all of these things. It's just, you see the downfall of Númenor, the last several generations, and then, of course, you see the good restored in the kingdoms in exile, Arnor and Gondor. And it's sort of like, that was a big old speed bump of bad.
Yeah. It feels like the speed bump is double the size almost, because this particular concept, because Tolkien does put a lot of importance on bloodlines, this concept of being able to sort of be immortal and how you can be mighty and have these bloodlines, but at the same time, you've got the opposite of that. You've got Meriadoc Brandybuck and Peregrine Took and a woman named Haleth, and here's Beren, who's just some guy, and there's that sort of back and forth between this, and it almost it begs the question, do you truly want to be in a place of power, right? You look at the rulers that had great times, and then the opposite end of that spectrum is really, really bad.
Really bad, as we're going to get to, because the fall only really has just begun. I will say this, though. It brings me back to that question that I think we dealt with on a Questions After Nightfall about Silmariën. If the line had been allowed to go through her, right? She ended up being the father of the first of the Lords of Andúnier. That line remained faithful. That was the line that ended with Elendil, keep in mind, Elendil's father, and we'll get to this eventually, Elendil's father is the one who goes and sails west again, violating the ban of the Valar in order to basically pull an Eärendil and say, please help us, the faithful. He's never seen or heard from again.
Yeah, we've had one guy flying on a boat to the Undying Lands, and
why not a
he
second
asked,
one?
"What about second?" But it didn't work
out.
But you know what? I think there's a great line from the second Chronicles of Narnia movie, Prince Caspian, where Lucy is asking Aslan, "Why didn't you come save us?" And Liam Neeson, in all of his voice acting glory, goes, "Things never happen the same way twice, dear one." And I know that there's a lot of like history repeating itself for traditional stuff from Tolkien, but that kind of a power move feels like a 1 in a million sort of thing.
It does. Oh, it really does. And that's the thing. So Elendil's father was never going to make it. But the point is that entire line from Silmariën all the way down to Elendil remained faithful. What if that line had been the line of kings and Númenor had never fallen?
Alan, I know you want me to write the fan fiction about this.
About Númenor still around. Yeah. And the influence of Númenor, I mean, because they would have still had to expand. At some point, Gondor and Arnor would exist. They wouldn't be kingdoms in exile. They would, and we never would have gone through that sort of evil empire phase. I don't know. It's a really interesting what if. I think maybe we'll chat about some possibilities of that in the postscript. But
you guys can't see Alan's facial expression, but the smile of like, oh my gosh, this is so exciting to think about.
Well, I hadn't really connected, but that idea about bloodlines made me think, I wonder,
Yeah.
All right. Obviously, that also brings up the mortal-immortal debate again, but we'll have to shelve that for now because we could be here for an hour on that. Instead, Ata-Namir did not want to hear this argument. He did not want to hear that he was just supposed to trust and wait for this purpose to show up. Instead, we read that he was ill-pleased with the counsel of the messengers and gave little heed to it. And the greater part of his people followed him, for they wished still to escape death in their own day, not waiting upon hope. And Ata-Namir lived to a great age, clinging to his life beyond the end of all joy, and he was the first of the Númenóreans to do this, refusing to depart until he was witless and unmanned, and denying to his son the kingship at the height of his days. And that, in fact, led to one of his names, the Unwilling.
A great yet horrible nickname to be
given. Yeah.
Now, the text of the appendices here skips forward to Ar-Adunacor. There are 6 kings and queens between Tar-Atanamir and Ar-Adunacor. We'll look at those briefly.
Right. So Tar-Atanamir was Ata-Namir's son, and it was during his reign that the split between kingsmen and faithful became even larger, and they stopped teaching the Elven tongues, though they still used Quenya for the royal titles out of fear of ill fortune.
Yeah, this was also a weird time for Númenor because, the bliss was fading, but their strength was growing. They began to fear death even more so. And this is when they began to, build those big mausoleums. And their wise men started trying to find ways to delay death or to even resurrect people.
That's right. The only thing they managed to do, though, was to develop the art of preserving and corrupt the dead flesh of men. So mummification, essentially. They started focusing more on temporal pleasures as well. And this sort of makes sense. Again, if you're trying to avoid death, then it's sort of like the extreme version of embracing life,
like the opposite end of the spectrum that is just as chaotic.
Right, exactly. It's eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. Those that lived turned the more eagerly to pleasure and revelry, desiring ever more goods and more riches. And after the days of Tar-Atanamir, the offering of the first fruits to Eru was neglected, and men went seldom any more to the hollow upon the heights of Meneltarma in the midst of the land.
Not surprisingly, this is the time, 2251 to be precise, when the ring wraiths began to appear, 3 of whom were said to be great lords of Númenórean race.
After
money's on Kemen from Rings of Power, but that's just me.
Kemen and Eärien and was it Balthazar, whatever his name is, the other guy?
Oh, yeah.
They're the 3 lords of Númenórean race right behind our Pharazôn in that one scene in episode 6. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm seeing her now in her black robes. I was like, aren't you a little short for a Nazgul?
Yeah.
Oh, man.
I love it.
After Tar-Atanamir was Tar-Telemite. Now, that's silver-handed per Christopher Tolkien's Index in Unfinished Tales. And given that name, you might imagine he loved silver and is said to have his servants seek ever for mithril.
Then we get to the third ruling queen. This is Tar-Atanamir. We read of her in Unfinished Tales that she gave little heed to ruling, loving rather music and dance, and the power was wielded by her husband, Herukalmo, younger than she, but a descendant of the same degree from Tar-Atanamir.
That would make them second cousins. By the way, obviously, Miss Party Girl Queen here, having a good old time, not even remotely caring about her job. Like, why even just turn the scepter down, let it go to your sibling, but no.
No, because you get the power, you get the respect, you want the glory.
But father, I just want to sing. I mean, no singing here, Vanamelde. That just hit me as I was thinking about it.
There's huge swaths of forest.
Now, when we look back at the list from the first reading today, the list of all the kings and queens of Númenor, we go from Tar-Atanamir to Tar-Alcaran. But Tar-Andukal would like a word. Herukalmo, the great-grandson of Tar-Atanamir, who married his second cousin, Queen Vanamelde, took the scepter when his wife died, giving himself the name Tar-Andukal instead of allowing the scepter to pass to their son, Alcaran.
Remember that quiz I mentioned before, Alan? This is just going to be word for word, recite what you just said verbally.
It's
terrifying. A verbal test.
I wouldn't even pass that test. And I've got the notes in front of me.
I know. Some do not reckon him in the line of kings and pass to Alcaran.
And I'm sure Alcaran is one of those who does not reckon him in the line of kings. Thanks, Dad. Yeah.
Feels like he might, yeah. We do get to Alcaran, who ruled for 80 years, but was the rightful king for 100. Mm-hmm. Not much happened during his reign, which,
pretty much.
Great. Yeah. Great. Yeah. He was followed by Tar-Kalmakil, meaning Sword of Light, who was a mighty captain, winning lands along the coast of Middle-earth and earning the hatred of a certain Dark Lord Sauron.
That's right. Now, interestingly, for those following the Rings of Power on Amazon, Kalmakil was the first king to have his name spoken in Adunaic. What was he called by the king's men? Belzegar. Belzegar. That's where they got that guy's name. It's the compression of the time frames and all that, but Belzegar.
It kind of works with the theming of this whole sort of situation that we see Rings of Power doing. Yeah. Finally, there was Tar-Atanamir, unless you have a printed version of the book prior to 2004, in which case you actually skip right to Ar-Adunakor.
That's right. There was a mistake in the lines. Christopher Tolkien points this out in Unfinished Tales. He writes, "When editing the Akalabaith, I had not observed that in the line of Elros, the ruler following Tar-Kalmakil was not Ar-Adunakor, but Tar-Atanamir. But it now seems perfectly clear from the fact alone that Tar-Ardamin's death date is here given as 2899, that he was omitted in error from the list in The Lord of the Rings."
Oh, utterly forgettable, though, in that basically nothing happened and he was followed by the worst king to date.
Oh, yes, he was. That's where we come back to the text as we get to the 20th king, who gave up Quenya altogether and named himself, well, like I said, it takes guts to do this, Ar-Adunakor, Lord of the West, pretty much naming himself after Manwë, the king of Arda, and that will not go over well. Now, under him, Quenya was actually banned, though the faithful still taught it in secret, and ships from Tol-Eressëa started coming much more rarely, much more secretly, in fact, totally secretly and much more rarely, only to the faithful in the West. And if you think it's bad now, just wait. Don, would you take the next passage?
I certainly would. The power and wealth of the Númenóreans nonetheless continued to increase, but their years lessened as their fear of death grew and their joy departed. Tar-Palantir attempted to amend the evil, but it was too late, and there was rebellion and strife in Númenor. When he died, his nephew, leader of the rebellion, seized the scepter and became King Ar-Pharazôn. Ar-Pharazôn the Golden was the proudest and most powerful of all the kings, and no less than the kingship of the world was his desire. He resolved to challenge Sauron the Great for supremacy in Middle-earth, and at length he himself set sail with a great navy and landed at Umbar. So great was the might and splendor of the Númenóreans that Sauron's own servants deserted him, and Sauron humbled himself, doing homage and craving pardon. Then Ar-Pharazôn, in the folly of his pride, carried him back as a prisoner to Númenor. It was not long before he had bewitched the king and was master of his council, and soon he had turned the hearts of all the Númenóreans, except the remnants of the faithful, back towards the darkness. And Sauron lied to the king, declaring that everlasting life would be his who possessed the undying lands, and that the ban was imposed only to prevent the kings of men from surpassing the Valar. But great kings take what is their right, he said. At length, Ar-Pharazôn listened to this counsel, for he felt the waning of his days, and was besotted by the fear of death. He prepared then the greatest armament that the world had seen, and when all was ready, he sounded his trumpets and set sail. And he broke the ban of the Valar, going up with war to wrest everlasting life from the lords of the West. When Ar-Pharazôn set foot upon the shores of Aman the Blessed, the Valar laid down their guardianship and called upon the One, and the world was changed. Númenor was thrown down and swallowed in the sea, and the undying lands were removed forever from the circles of the world. So ended the glory of Númenor.
So ended it indeed. My goodness, that is a gut punch to see Númenor go from, the gift given to the men who allied with the Eldar and took down Morgoth to people who just fall into Sauron's lies. And
we could have had it all, but now Númenor is rolling in the deep.
It sure is. Now, we read again at the beginning of this that the Númenóreans' power and wealth kept growing. Of course it did. They were taking power and wealth from the men of Middle-earth. and as a result, I think partly as a result of that, though the text doesn't say specifically, their lifespan began to shrink as they become more afraid of death. It's like the thing they're most afraid of is now coming sooner because they're afraid of that thing.
Surprise, it actually makes things worse.
Yeah.
The text jumps straight to Tar-Palantir and his repentance. But let's take a look at the kings in between, or really the one king in between, because we get Ar-Zimrathon and Ar-Sakalthor, but it's Ar-Gimilzor we want to spend a little bit of time on, as he is skipped over here in the appendix.
That's right. Now, in Unfinished Tales, we read that he was the greatest enemy of the faithful that had yet arisen, and he forbade utterly the use of the Eldarin tongues, and would not permit any of the Eldar to come to the land, and punished those that welcomed them. He revered nothing, and went never to the Hollow of Eru.
As well, in the Akalabeth, we also learn that in his day, the White Tree was untended and began to decline, and he forbade utterly the use of the elven tongues, and punished those that welcomed the ships of Erisea, that still came secretly to the west shores of the land.
He also forcibly removed the faithful from the west and relocated them to the east, essentially moving the faithful to the harbor of Romenna, and the faithful started leaving Númenor in droves. Now, Ar-Gimilzor was fine with their leaving so long as they didn't come back. He desired to end all friendship between their people and the Eldar of Erisea, whom they named the spies of the Valar, hoping to keep their deeds and their counsels hidden from the lords of the West. But all that they did was known to Manwë. Of course, all that they did was known to Manwë. That's how this thing works. Yep. The Valar were ticked. Earlier we read that Manwë was grieved. Now, angry, and the elves stopped coming altogether.
Yeah. The appendix mentions Tar-Palantir, but we should mention how this all came about. Gimilzor was married to Inzilbeth, a member of the faithful, and in Akalabeth we read, "No love was there between Ar-Gimilzor and his queen, or between their sons. Inziladun, the elder, was like his mother, in mind as in body. But Gimilcad, the younger, went with his father, unless he were yet prouder and more willful."
Now, not surprisingly, Gimilzor would have given Gimilcad the scepter had he been allowed to choose, but it went to Inziladun, and he's the one who took the name of Tar-Palantir. He gave peace for a while to the faithful, and he went once more at due seasons to the Hollow of Eru upon the Meneltarma, which Ar-Gimilzor had forsaken. The white tree he tended again with honor, and he prophesied, saying that when the tree perished, then also would the line of the kings come to its end. But his repentance was too late to appease the anger of the Valar with the insolence of his fathers, of which the greater part of his people did not repent. And I think that part's key.
Yeah.
You
can apologize, but the damage has been done.
But specifically, the greater part of his people did not repent. If somehow Palantir was able to, sway 80% of the population and sort of get the critical mass going to point Númenor in the right direction, I have to think that the Valar would have given them a little more time. Maybe said, okay, we're getting you back on the right path. But when nobody listens to Palantir and the island still continues doing what it's doing, and everybody else is still building their mausoleums and sending ships to Middle Earth to take more money, and all the bad things are happening, it's too late.
Yeah. And that tension between the brothers in Zilladun, Tar Palantir, and Gimilcad would carry through. Gimilcad died, but his son was Pharazôn, a name you have no doubt heard by now. And he was successful in wars in Middle-earth. And when he came back after his father died, while Tar Palantir was king, the hearts of the people were turned to him, for he brought with him great wealth and was, for the time, free in his giving.
And that is how we get what the text here in the appendix gives us, the usurpation of the scepter, right? It should have gone to Miriel, daughter of Tar Palantir, but she was taken to wife by Pharazôn against her will and against the law of Númenor, since she was the child of his father's brother. That is, first cousin.
Yeah, and as we read here, he would not settle for anything less than the kingship of the entire world, which means, unfortunately for him, challenging Sauron.
And I'm just picturing him at the front of the Titanic. I'm king of the world!
So I love it. I am now picturing Tristan on top of one of the boats as our Pharazôn in Rings of Power.
I'm gonna be king of the world.
Little did he know, because we've got Sauron here, and you've got to challenge him. But Sauron actually fears Númenor, and we spend a lot of time on this when we get to the Akallabeth in a couple of seasons. This pride, right? This hubris, this incredible way that Sauron really manipulates him and the people of Númenor.
That's right. Although this had a lot to do with his being in possession of the One Ring at the time, which isn't something mentioned in the text. But in Letter 211 to Rona Bear in 1958, Tolkien writes that Sauron's personal surrender was voluntary and cunning. He got free transport to Númenor. He naturally had the One Ring, and so very soon dominated the minds and wills of most of the Númenóreans. And we will be going into this a lot again when we get to the Akallabeth proper. But we'll just mention the short version of it is that it involved Melkor worship, the building of a temple, and human sacrifices along with the burning of the White Tree. There's your TLDR.
Yeah, if you want to see what might happen in Rings of Power seasons 3, 4, and possibly 5, provided Númenor is still a thing, that's probably what we're looking at for sure.
Exactly.
So instead, we will move on straight to what the appendix says is the greatest armament that the world has ever seen. Let's read that part in the Akallabeth. In that time, the fleets of the Númenóreans darkened the sea upon the west of the land, and they were like an archipelago of 1,000 isles. Their masts were as a forest upon the mountains, and their sails like a brooding cloud, and their banners were golden and black, and all things waited upon the word of our Pharazôn. And Sauron withdrew into the inmost circle of the temple, and men brought him victims to be burned.
Even after Manwë's eagles showed up, arrayed as for battle, our Pharazôn is said to have hardened his heart, and he went aboard his mighty ship Alcarandus, Castle of the Sea. Many-oared it was, and many-masted, golden and sable, and upon it the throne of our Pharazôn was set. Then he did on his panoply and his crown, and let raise his standard, and he gave the signal for the raising of the anchors, and in that hour the trumpets of Númenor outrang the thunder. Thus the fleets of the Númenóreans moved against the menace of the west, and there was little wind, but they had many oars and many strong slaves to row beneath the lash. The sun went down, and there came a great silence. Darkness fell upon the land, and the sea was still, while the world waited for what should betide. Slowly the fleets passed out of the sight of the watchers in the havens, and their lights faded, and night took them, and in the morning they were gone. For a wind arose in the east, and it wafted them away, and they broke the ban of the Valar and sailed into forbidden seas, going up with war against the deathless, to wrest from them everlasting life within the circles of the world. And I have one thing to say to that. Good luck.
Yeah, it's probably not going to go over too well, is it? After Ar-Pharazôn and his fleet arrive in Aman, he claims the land for his own, and Manwë is just like, you know what? I don't need to deal with this.
Yeah.
He calls upon Ilúvatar, and as the text says here, the world was changed.
Oh, yes.
But the land of Aman and Erisea of the Eldar were taken away and removed beyond the reach of men forever. And Andor, the land of gifts, Númenor of the kings, Elena of the Star of Earendil, was utterly destroyed.
And from Akalabeth, one last time, we read, in an hour unlooked for by men, this doom befell, on the 39th day since the passing of the fleets. Then suddenly fire burst from the Meneltarma, and there came a mighty wind and a tumult of the earth, and the sky reeled, and the hills slid, and Númenor went down into the sea, with all its children, and its wives, and its maidens, and its ladies proud, and all its gardens, and its halls, and its towers, its tombs, and its riches, and its jewels, and its webs, and its things painted and carven, and its laughter, and its mirth, and its music, its wisdom, and its lore, they vanished forever. And last of all, the mounting wave, green and cold and plumed with foam, climbing over the land, took to its bosom Tar-Miriel the queen, fairer than silver or ivory or pearls. Too late she strove to ascend the steep ways of the Meneltarma to the holy place, for the waters overtook her, and her cry was lost in the roaring of the wind.
Oh,
Yeah.
What a way to go. Like, all of those things that Tolkien lists, the riches, the jewels, the painted things, the mirth, the music,
the wisdom, the people, the gardens, all of it. Just, and that's the thing. He reels off this sentence, and it's a long sentence. You realize that one sentence started with, then suddenly fire burst from the Meneltarma, and it goes all the way to they vanished forever. That's a huge, long sentence with all these things that are being destroyed. And it's heartbreaking. With every one of those things, it's another punch. With this, and with this, and it's this, and it's this.
You know what? It's also interesting too, and I don't think I've ever really truly considered it, as I say almost every time I'm on this podcast. It's given me something new to think about.
I like that.
I think about what Aragorn would look like as the king of Númenor, and like all of the things that were lost that could have, come to Middle-earth. And not that it wasn't, obviously the faithful were still there, but like there's so much more that could have been. And I think that is sort of where...
Definitely weep for what could have been, no doubt.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, we will come back a little bit and talk about those faithful after the break. Now, folks, if you enjoy the show, we hope you'll consider supporting the PPP by joining the Fellowship of the Podcast. That's what gives me the ability to work on making this show better every season. And when you join, you get the best Discord community around. That includes live episode recordings, hangouts every month. You get episode postscripts, you get ad-free episodes, free merch, and more.
You can also become part of our Questions After Nightfall episodes, or even join us as a guest in the North Wing. So please go to patreon.com/prancingponypod to show your support and the fellowship of the podcast.
You can always help us out by giving us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts and a rating on Spotify. And please recommend us to your friends.
But make sure you don't recommend taking immortal life from any gods.
No, please don't. Accept your mortality. Be happy with it.
Yeah. Of all things to tell your listeners on a podcast.
Accept your mortality?
Accept your mortality and subscribe to his Patreon.
Well, I'm certainly not planning on becoming immortal with the revenue. I mean, it's not enough to freeze my head and
No, I don't think that technology's even there yet. So
all right.
We carry on.
We do.
Alan, you want to give us our last reading portion for this episode?
I think I do. The last leaders of the faithful, Elendil and his sons, escaped from the downfall with 9 ships, bearing a seedling of Nimloth and the 7 seeing stones, gifts of the Eldar to their house. And they were born on the wind of a great storm and cast upon the shores of Middle-earth. There they established in the northwest the Númenórean realms in exile, Arnor and Gondor. Elendil was the high king and dwelt in the north at Annúminas, and the rule in the south was committed to his sons, Isildur and Anarion. They founded there Osgiliath, between Minas Ithil and Minas Anor, not far from the confines of Mordor. For this good at least, they believed, had come out of the ruin, that Sauron also had perished. But it was not so. Sauron was indeed caught in the wreck of Númenor, so that the bodily form in which he long had walked perished. But he fled back to Middle-earth, a spirit of hatred born upon a dark wind. He was unable ever again to assume a form that seemed fair to men, but became black and hideous, and his power thereafter was through terror alone. He re-entered Mordor and hid there for a time in silence. But his anger was great when he learned that Elendil, whom he most hated, had escaped him and was now ordering a realm upon his borders. Therefore, after a time, he made war upon the exiles before they should take root. Orodruin burst once more into flame and was named anew in Gondor Amon Amarth, Mount Doom. But Sauron struck too soon, before his own power was rebuilt, whereas the power of Gil-galad had increased in his absence. And in the last alliance that was made against him, Sauron was overthrown and the One Ring was taken from him. So ended the Second Age.
And then everything after that was awesome, and nothing bad
That's
ever
right.
happened
Nothing
in
bad
Middle-earth ever again.
Yeah.
Oh, we finally get to see the good guys
Yes.
here. Elendil's there with his sons. We've escaped the downfall on 9 ships.
Now, also on said ships, a seedling of the White Tree, the 7 Palantiri, and not listed here, the Stone of Erech that we see later with Isildur and the Men of the Mountains.
Yeah, we are told here that they were born on the wind of a great storm and carried to the coast of Middle-earth.
That's a very short way of saying what we could read in the Akallabeth, and so we will. A much more vivid description. But when the devouring wave rolled over the land and Númenor toppled to its fall, then Elendil would have been overwhelmed and would have deemed it the lesser grief to perish. For no wrench of death could be more bitter than the loss and agony of that day. But the great wind took him, wilder than any wind that men had known, roaring from the west, and it swept his ships far away, and it rent their sails and snapped their masts, hunting the unhappy men like straws upon the water. 9 ships there were, 4 for Elendil, and for Isildur 3, and for Anarion 2. And they fled before the black gale out of the twilight of doom into the darkness of the world. And the deeps rose beneath them in towering anger, and waves like unto mountains moving with great caps of writhen snow bore them up amid the wreckage of the clouds, and after many days cast them away upon the shores of Middle-earth.
Father and sons are split up, and
Yep.
here, instead of reading from the Akallabeth, we actually look to Of the Rings of Power and the Third Age.
Excellent. See, multiple sources make for a more coherent narrative.
There we go. Elendil was cast up by the waves in the land of Lindon, and he was befriended by Gil-galad. Thence he passed up the river Lune, and beyond Ered Luin he established his realm. And his people dwelt in many places in Eriador, about the courses of the Lune and the Baranduin. But his chief city was Anúminas, beside the water of Lake Nanuiel.
Isildur and Anarion were borne away southwards, and at the last they brought their ships up the great river Anduin, that flows out of Rhovanion into the western sea and the bay of Belfalas. And they established a realm in those lands that were after called Gondor, whereas the northern kingdom was named Arnor.
And while Elendil rules Arnor and his sons rule Gondor, they labor under the erroneous impression that Sauron has died
Yep.
during the downfall of Númenor. And it's not entirely unreasonable
No.
to think that.
I would have thought
the
the same thing. I mean, it makes sense. Nothing survived that. But the text tells us it was not so. And instead it speaks of his new form, right? Black and hideous, his power through terror alone. And now, finally, he is unable to ever appear fair to anybody.
Tolkien also talks about Sauron surviving the downfall in that letter to Rhonabear that we mentioned earlier. This is letter 211. Sauron was first defeated by a miracle, a direct action of God the Creator, changing the fashion of the world when appealed to by Manwë. Though reduced to a spirit of hatred born on a dark wind, I do not think one need boggle at this spirit carrying off the One Ring, upon which his power of dominating minds now largely depends. That Sauron was not himself destroyed in the anger of the One is not my fault. The problem of evil and its apparent toleration is the permanent one for all who concern themselves with our world. The indestructibility of spirits with free wills, even by the creator of them, is also an inevitable feature, if one either believes in their existence or feigns it in a story.
I love that.
Ooh.
One need not boggle at this spirit carrying off the One Ring. We get that question a lot. Like, how in the world, if Sauron had his ring, how did he take it with him when he was, but that's exactly.
Don't think about it too much. Yeah, just,
You need not boggle about this.
Yeah.
I do love the way he just hand waves it. He just
Yeah.
So not only is Sauron not dead, he's ticked off, right? The guy in Númenor that he hated the absolute most, Elendil, the leader of the faithful, whose son saved the White Tree, and I'm sure he's not very happy about that, has not only also survived, but is now setting up a kingdom on his borders. So he's mad, and this leads Sauron to attack too soon before his own power was rebuilt. And frankly, that's sort of the hints of the end of the Third Age too, right? I mean, you think about how he attacked too early. That was actually the tactic they were trying to get him to do. And here, we're going to read his too early an attack at this point. Now Sauron prepared war against the Eldar and the men of Westernesse, and the fires of the mountain were wakened again. And Sauron gathered to him great strength of his servants out of the east and the south, and among them were not a few of the high race of Númenor. For in the days of the sojourn of Sauron in that land, the hearts of well nigh all its people had been turned towards darkness. Therefore many of those who sailed east in that time and made fortresses and dwellings upon the coasts were already bent to his will, and they served him still gladly in Middle-earth.
He took Minas. It's getting intense. He took Minas Ithil. He destroyed the White Tree, and it's like, hey, wait, didn't I kill that one already? I can just imagine him being like, hang on,
this looks familiar.
Yeah, but Isildur got out of there with a little seedling beforehand. Now Elendil and Gil-galad took counsel together, for they perceived that Sauron would grow too strong and would overcome all his enemies one by one if they did not unite against him. Therefore, they made the league, which is called the Last Alliance.
That's right. And finally, the host of Gil-galad and Elendil had the victory, for the might of the elves was still great in those days, and the Númenóreans were strong and tall and terrible in their wrath. Against Aiglos, the spear of Gil-galad, none could stand, and the sword of Elendil filled orcs and men with fear, for it shone with the light of the sun and of the moon, and it was named Narsil. Then Gil-galad and Elendil passed into Mordor and encompassed the stronghold of Sauron, and they laid siege to it for 7 years, and suffered grievous loss by fire and by the darts and bolts of the enemy. And Sauron sent many sorties against them. There in the valley of Gorgoroth, Anarion, son of Elendil, was slain, and many others. But at the last, the siege was so strait that Sauron himself came forth, and he wrestled with Gil-galad and Elendil, and they both were slain, and the sword of Elendil broke under him as he fell. But Sauron also was thrown down, and with the hilt shard of Narsil, Isildur cut the ruling ring from the hand of Sauron, and took it for his own. Then Sauron was for that time vanquished, and he forsook his body, and his spirit fled far away and hid in waste places, and he took no visible shape again for many long years.
I love that passage. I also love explaining to people that no, the Peter Jackson movies do a little bit of a disservice to Gil-galad and Elendil. I really hope we see that fight.
Oh, wouldn't that be great?
Action.
Yes. The Last Alliance is the end of the 5th season. Yeah.
I feel like that's where they're heading.
Actually, I want the disaster of the Gladden Fields. I want Isildur showing that he realizes taking the ring was wrong, and he's going to go send it back to the elves to be destroyed. Or to have something done with it, right? He knows he's got to get rid of it, so he's going to take it to the elves, and then end with Isildur's death.
Oh, what a way to end Rings of... we'll
see.
Oh, man.
We'll see.
We'll see what happens. We will see what happens. We have a little bit more on Sauron attacking too soon. For this, we go to letter 211. Sauron was, of course, confounded by the disaster and diminished, having expended enormous energy in the corruption of Númenor. He needed time for his own bodily rehabilitation and for gaining control over his former subjects. He was attacked by Gil-galad and Elendil before his new domination was fully established.
That's right, and indeed, so ended the Second Age. But Barlaman struck too soon before his own power was rebuilt, whereas the power of the mailbag had increased in his absence, and in the last alliance that was made against him, Barlaman was overthrown, and the bag was taken from him. Don, what does Barlaman have for us tonight?
Barlaman has for us a question that is yet another sort of what if. I feel as though Barlaman's specifically having these questions for me, but this question comes to us from Steve from Kentucky. Do you think there is a world that exists where Elendil sees what is happening in Númenor and takes the scepter for himself? And if so, what does Númenor become beyond that?
No, actually. I think Elendil knows that that's not a thing to be done. That as much as he can't stand Ar-Pharazôn, as much as he knows this is wrong, usurping the scepter would be even more wrong. He also wouldn't be able to get popular support enough to do it, because by now the Kingsmen run Númenor, right? Elendil and the faithful are 5% of the population, if that. They're a very small remnant of Númenor. And I don't think he would get the groundswell of support that he would need to actually be successful in usurping the throne.
The Númenórean Civil War, to me, feels less like a civil war and more a persecution. Tolkien gives, names to great battles, and this is just straight up like, we're actively persecuting you for your beliefs.
And it's slowly, it's sort of like the frog in boiling water. I mean, the faithful were a minority as they became a minority as more and more people became jealous of the elves and wanting to avoid death. So more and more you had this faction that was growing anti-elf. Then you get a king saying, well, immortality is mine by right. And so now, of course, a lot of people who feel the same way are lining up on that side. You got the faithful. So now you're beginning the polarization process. And as that happens, more and more people join the Kingsmen faction. And the Kingsmen faction actively persecutes the faithful so that they become less and less faithful. So there just wouldn't be enough.
I wonder then, is there a world that exists because there have been so many, situations like this in real world examples? Was it really just a battle of the two minds? Was it, okay, well, are people like him, do they sort of go where the power lies? And if the winds shift, is this sort of like an Aaron Burr in Hamilton situation?
I'm sure that there would be some who would, but the problem is he'd have to establish that power first, and he just doesn't have enough of a force to do that. I mean, that's the thing. Pharazôn controls everything at this point. Mm-hmm. You got to remember, Sauron is there.
Oh, true.
If Elendil even shows his face, Sauron's going to end up sacrificing him in the temple. I mean, there's too much to risk. Pharazôn controls, whatever legal system they have, whatever enforcement system they have. He controls everything. It is essentially a dictatorship, and he is the guy in charge. But of course, he's only nominally in charge because Sauron's really running the show. So Elendil is at great risk just, existing. And he certainly doesn't have the power to usurp the throne. However, to answer the question, maybe think about what it would look like. Let's go back to the thing we talked about during the episode. What if Silmariën had been allowed to inherit the throne and Elendil was just the proper king instead of having to usurp the throne? In that world, of course, the fall never took place this way.
But does the fall happen regardless? Does Elendil, and maybe that's the real question to get at, does Elendil fall to corruption eventually?
Well, here's the thing. I don't know that they would take Sauron back as prisoner. I mean, let's be honest that
oh yeah,
that's a huge factor in the final end of the downfall.
Excellent point.
Now, would the downfall have happened had they not captured Sauron? The answer is yes, I believe. Pharazôn was simply, it might have been another generation or two, but I doubt it. I still think Pharazôn would have been the end, simply because he was the culmination of all the kings before him who had espoused this position of, why should we have to die? We're going to take immortality. Now, yes, Sauron's little poke and, great kings take what is theirs. It certainly speeds up the process. If Elendil were to be the one to fall, it would only be because the people over time were naturally prone to falling, even if the kings were right. So let's go back to the line of Silmariën and the lords of Andunier, and every one of those guys is a faithful. In a way, you tend to think that at some point one of those faithful would have taken the same paths that the other kings took.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, it's a pattern for sure.
In a way, it's easier to stay faithful when you see the example on the other side. To see the contrast and realize that's my alternative. it's not so easy to remain faithful if the tenets of the faith start to slide a little bit, right? It's easier to define yourself as who you're not and that you are the opposite of X if there is an X to compare yourself to.
You need that kind of comparison to be like, here's where I stand, here are where my beliefs are.
I mean, it does. It's not like it's necessary, but it certainly helps. And I think that's, again, we don't see the faithful called the faithful until there's an element of the population that is supporting Tar-Atanamir and his claim to have the right to immortality. So now you have the faithful because they're in opposition to the king's men. They're in opposition to these people who want to wrest immortality from the elves and say that this is theirs by right. So I don't know. I mean, I still think, though, when we look at that bloodline, because that is the line, I mean, look at who's in that line. It is Elendil. It is Isildur. It is Aragorn. It is all of these mighty people. I tend to think that the world in which Elendil is king of Númenor, because agnatic primogeniture was removed and replaced with absolute primogeniture early enough for Silmariën to inherit the throne.
I've already forgotten how to pronounce it, but carry on.
In that world, I don't think Númenor falls. I don't know if it's still around or if it falls somewhere in between, because as we see, even his descendants in Arnor fail. As we'll get to, in next week.
The Rangers, the whole,
right?
They
end up falling. One of the, what is it, the 8th or 9th king, I think, of Arnor. When he dies, his son split up the kingdom, and that split is the beginning of the end of Arnor. In fact, we'll see that next week, and that wraps it up for another episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast.
There we go.
Please be sure to come back next week when we begin our look at the North Kingdom of Arnor.
Folks, that was the best segue I've ever seen on this podcast during my time here. When are 3 kingdoms better than one? It's a trick question. They are not.
That's right.
A couple of thank yous that Alan and I want to give out to the members of Team PPP, editor Jordan Rannells, who I don't have to apologize as much for this time.
Just a general apology for the rest of your run would be good. Yeah.
Pretty much. We've got Barleyman Becca Davis, social media manager Casey Hilsey, event and Patreon community coordinator Katie McKenna, graphic artist Megan Collins, and website guru Phil Dean.
Now, please take a minute to check out theprancingponypodcast.com. It's where you're going to find your show notes, outtakes, Prancing Pony Ponderings, and our online storefront where you can get PPP merch, including all the really cool episode artwork that Megan has done for the PPP over the last 2 or 3 seasons.
You'll also want to visit our library page. The Prancing Pony Podcast is, after all, a podcast about the books. So if you are interested in a book we've mentioned on the show, you'll find a link for it in our library. We do get a small amount of compensation when you make your purchase, and we do thank you for that.
Indeed. And we also want to thank our patrons at the Kierdance contribution tier. I'll start with DeMay in Alaska, Chad in Texas, Lance in New Jersey, Paul in Colorado, Joseph in Michigan, Kathy from North Carolina, Carlos in California, Brian in the UK, Jerry from Washington, Joe in Washington, Erwin from the Netherlands, Ben in Minnesota, Anthony in Texas, Karen in the UK, June in Ireland, Zaksu in Illinois, Sara in New Jersey, Joshua in Massachusetts, Lucy in Texas, and Keith in Alabama.
There's also Erica in Texas, Carson in Oklahoma, Vivian in California, James in Massachusetts, Anne in Kentucky, Sean in New Jersey, Mason in California, Maureen from Massachusetts, Olivia in London, Robert in Arizona, Nick in Wisconsin, Lewis in South Carolina, Thomas in Germany, Craig in California, Bailey in Texas, Kevin in Massachusetts, Julie in Washington, Bruce in California, and Joe in Maryland. Thank you all very much for your support.
Indeed. Thank you.
Make sure you do not miss any episodes of the Prancing Pony Podcast. You can subscribe now through Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or your favorite podcast app.
And one last thing, as always, don't forget to send your thoughts, comments, and, well, most of all, your Quenya names for the PPP co-hosts to Barliman at theprancingponypodcast.com.
And if you would like your voice literally heard, just send us an audio of your question. Visit podinbox.com/prancingponypod to record your questions for us. Be sure, though, to still email the question to Barliman, though.
Now, even though Barliman's been a lot more reliable lately, there is still a lot of mail to sort through. We'll try to get to you just as soon as we're able. As always, though, this has been far too short a time to spend among such excellent and admirable listeners. But until next time,
I have been Don Marshall, the obscure Lord of the Rings facts guy, and this has been Alan Sisto, someone I believe might be smart enough to not take their mortal enemy into his house.
I appreciate the high praise, Don. Thank you.